Welcome, everyone, to the HB Global Employee Ownership Podcast Series. We are starting 2026 off with a mini-series where Bob Whalen, CEO of HB Global, and Stacy Baum, Senior Vice President of People and Culture, will be focused on what it means to scale culture and how the mission, vision, and core values of HB Global play into that, but also where the rubber meets the road, the behaviors that support that, how being an ESOP supports that, and more. Today specifically, they're going to be focused on core values and talking a lot about the core value of team, but also talking about the other core values of trust, grit, and growth. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties with video for this podcast recording for those of you on YouTube, but we hope you still enjoy the content. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. We recognize that this podcast is available to the general public, but we just want to say that the views expressed in it are in the context of HB Global and may not apply to broader audiences. With that, take it away.
Good morning.
So, as we're wrapping up 2025, here we are, closing out the year, getting into the planning of 2026. And I think for us coming up, one of our big focuses is going to be on scaling our culture and talking about our core values.
Yeah, so, I think it's always good, for us to go back and level set with everybody around our core values, because I do think, it's one of the most important things relative to us, scaling our culture. Trust is our foundational core value. I think it's really important to us that we're reliable to all the constituencies we work with, whether it be our employee owners, our customers, our supplier, that the folks, that we're touching, we want to be trusted. Secondly, team, we're going to spend a good bit of time here this morning, and it's our focus core value for 2026. I think of team as being the core value that you kind of know it, when you've got it, when you have a great team dynamic and those that you're working with. But I also think it's the one that takes the most work. You can't just snap your fingers and have a great team. We're all so different. There's all so many different dynamics, and we're all part of so many teams that it's the hardest and the one that takes the most effort and just ever evolving. And then, of course, grit is the one that I think is most natural for our employee owners. We've hired for grit. I think it naturally comes out in the types of folks that we have affinity for hiring, and it comes through very quickly when we're interviewing folks. We know the people that have grit, and so it's very natural, and our folks don't have to work on it. And then growth, we're just trying to get a little bit better, each day, whether it be personally or professionally. And so those are the core values that I think are like the cornerstone, of our culture that we're trying to scale.
So when you joined HB McClure, what were the core values?
Yeah, so we went through a process, and mission, vision, core values has always been a very important part of my business, upbringing. Started with Continental Medical, my very first job. About a year into my tenure there, we hired a new vice president of human resources, Frank Fritsch, who ended up, being a mentor of mine, and we've used him for leadership coaching, here at HB, over the years. But really based building a culture around mission, vision, and core values. And so it was always part of how I've approached business. And so we went through an exercise when I first started to articulate, our core values, and it was trust, quality, and value since 1914. And that was really the core values of the senior leadership time. It was more of like a democracy and how we came up with that. And I think what's happened to the core values of our company, it's become more and more a reflection, of Bob Whalen and what Bob Whalen thinks is important for our business. Because I'm going to be the person, that's articulating these the most. As the CEO, you're talking about the core values the most. And so if we have a core value that really isn't core to me,
Yes.
it really comes through to the organization. And so what happened is we've gone through an evolution, over the 17 years that I've been here. And it first evolved into a set of seven, core values, of which our four were part of those seven.
Okay.
But what we found very quickly was seven was impossible for our employees to relate to all these seven, core values.
Yes.
And so we felt like four was very manageable.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really only one that was part of that I think is a really important part of who we are. And so we incorporated into the behavior of team, which is respect. I think respect is such a big part of who we are and reflects how we feel that everybody's part of the team and we need to respect
Right.
every single individual in our organization, no matter what your responsibility are. You wouldn't be here if you weren't important. And I think that has to come through in how we interact and how we go about, doing our work together. And so I think that that's a big part of it too. And we'll see over time if we think we can handle a fifth one. But that's really the evolution, our core values and where they are. And I know they're very important to me. I think over time, we more and more use them for selection. And also we have many, many groups within our organization that use them in the review process of evaluating, our employees. And I think that's just the evolution of our organization.
So, as we've acquired businesses, have you seen any pushback to adopting these four core values?
Yeah, we've never had an organization, push back, and I don't know if it's because I'm so passionate, about those core values,
or they're just really good.
Yeah, what I would say is I don't think we've done any acquisitions, even the ones that haven't gone as well, where the core values weren't at least aligned with where we were. I would not say all of our organization that those are the most important core values to their organizations, but they have all been very aligned with who they are. You stick out pretty quickly in this industry if you're not gritty. If you're just kind of going through the motions, you're not going to sustain yourself. And a lot of our businesses, have sustained themselves over multiple generations, so that aligns very quickly. The industry is always evolving, so the growth piece is who we are. You don't survive in any of the markets, if you're not trustworthy. And so, all of those things together are aligned. And then, we start the process of really focusing those core values and making them very important within each one of the divisions that are part of our company.
I think, too, our team does a really good job during the due diligence process. So I think there'd probably be some broader conversations if we were looking to bring on a company that was not aligned with those core values.
Well, and I think that that's where if you look at the team that's involved in the acquisitions, is mostly our shared services team here at HB Global. And those individuals that are part of that team are all very highly aligned with those core values. You don't really, cut it here for very long if you're, don't really buy into those core values. And so they're on the lookout. And I think, our teams see it. And part of the due diligence process, frankly, no matter what the discussion is about that you're going through during the due diligence, it's an opportunity to assess alignment with who we are. Is this relationship going to work, after, we come together? And we do a lot of things, I think, to give us a high probability of success post-transaction, giving a lot of autonomy to the divisions, that we acquire, showing respect, doing what we say we're going to do. Those things all set us up, for success. But I think I just a huge shout out to our team, because the language that'll be used is, Bob, I don't think there's an alignment here.
Right.
We were communicated this and it turns out not to be true. Not sure that we can trust this, leadership team of this organization that we're talking to. And we have, not very many deals that get past the first couple of meetings because we're also, pretty good at picking out the ones that are just like, oh, no, 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 no,
Yeah.
no. Like this is not going to work. But I think it's really a team effort, that the whole shared services team really comes together and understands, what the position is. And hopefully everybody feels comfort and that they can come forward and say, I know we've put a lot of resource into this, but I think this is a really bad idea, and so I think it's really important.
So today we're going to talk primarily about the team core value. Do you want to share a little bit about your thoughts? I know you already touched on respect as a behavior with team.
Yes, I think it's incredibly important relative to team. But as I've already said too, I think it's the core value that you actually have to work the hardest at, and it can fall apart, really quickly. It doesn't take too much to get you going in the wrong direction, as a team. So I think it makes a ton of sense that you spend a disproportionate amount of your time in core values and really focusing on the team. And I've always believed, and it was, people have heard me talk about this, frankly, for the last 15 years. When I came into HB McClure, part of it was that I was very intentional that I wanted to build a great team. That's what I was trying to do. That's really what I wanted to be part of. And, not every team that wins is a great team.
Right.
Sometimes they peacefully coexist for long enough
Yes.
to accomplish the goal. But the problem with business is you almost can't do enough in a short period of time that you win. Business is not something that you win by having one great, month or one great quarter or one great year or even one great decade. I mean, we can blow this whole thing up by not, doing the right things, over a relatively short period of time. And so that was always the focus. And I have always believed that, yes, you want great players, but the team is way more important. Like I would not describe myself as far as a talent as being a 10 out of 10 as a CEO. Hopefully I'm a great teammate, to the teams I'm on, and I'm on multiple teams.
Right.
There's multiple teams that I participate in, and hopefully people feel that I'm a great teammate as part of those. But I really believe, you're trying to make 1 + 1 = 4. That's what you do with a team. And so we want the best players, but more importantly, we want to build great teams, and we want to recognize that it takes work to do that. And you must always be vigilant, relative to that.
I think it's so true. I mean, teamwork and building a great team is not about checking a box. And there's always the challenge of just as soon as you start to feel it and it starts clicking, you have someone new enter or someone exit, and it just changes the dynamic a little bit. So it's always a work in progress.
It is. And like just take the example of adding somebody to the team. That's an opportunity where you have new skills, new talents that you can deploy. It's also a time where everybody, is feeling each other, and how does this, and a person can really, spin a team in a negative direction, too.
Right.
And so I think the stronger your team is, whenever you bring somebody new in, the better able you're to handle those situations, so if everybody exhibits good team behavior, and what are some great, team behaviors? Well, first of all, I think humility is a big one. Take our shared services team. None of us really know what the others go through on a minute by minute basis,
Sure.
all the things that they're responsible thing and all the things we have to handle. And we all have parts of our job that interact with almost everybody else, on the team. There's almost nobody on that team that you don't interact with, that there's not a human resource component to what we're doing. So we need to act. And that requires, first and foremost, that we communicate a lot. But I think we have to have humility relative to what the other person is responsible to do. And also to understand that there's going to be choices that are made along the way that none of us execute 100% on every single thing.
Right.
The world changes. We have to change our priorities, which causes something to not get done when we had committed to do it. Now I think there's great behaviors around, communicating that, which we all fall short on times. And so, I think the second thing is, a starting point is to give everybody else as much grace as you give yourself. Lots of us have a tendency, we know the motivation that we have when we're doing something, but we don't always ascribe that level of grace to other people in what they do. And I think to really work on that and to really understand, that, people are trying to accomplish the right things, let's communicate, let's work on it, and how we go about it.
And to be a good teammate and offer to help.
Yes.
That's always another option.
And as we talk about things, this is a really good, time to also acknowledge people are going through things outside of work, that may impact their performance at work. And look, we have a job to do and we want to do it as well as we can all the time, but we're not always at our best. I think we want to judge people not on their worst day of the year. We want to judge them, on, what they're doing, on the regular. And maybe, one of those ways that you could show grace is if something's a little out of character, maybe we can, ask them about it. Anything, I can do to help or whatever. And, I just think it starts with an attitude, of wanting to be a good teammate.
Right.
And we all have things to do and we all are impatient at times. We all exhibit some things at times, which is not the best behavior, for the time. But it's to have it in front of mind and to really understand that it takes work, that you need to do it. We all have things that are important to us, but at times, we need to, move them back and really just be a good teammate.
And I think there's also that balance too. So we talked about heading into the new year and being focused on goals, but it's also everyone has their individual goals, they have team goals. How do you accomplish what matters to you in your goals for the year, but also still be a good teammate in supporting everyone else?
Yeah, and I do think, some of us that comes more easily than for others. I think, there's personalities that it's easier to do this to. And then there's others that are more difficult. And sometimes they're your best performers because they're the most tenacious. We talk about grit being a core value. Can you have too much grit? Yeah. If the thing in front of you is literally the only thing in the entire world that matters to you, well, that may not be the most important thing for the team or the organization or whatever. And so there's also a time to be able to step back. Well, that person with the very most grit, which is a core value of ours, can hinder, team performance. And it's just, it's working with that and putting that person in the best position so they can exhibit that the most, but realizing, that they need to do that, every once in a while is really, I think an important part, of being a great, teammate and, realizing again, back to being humble, that we all exhibit things that are not necessarily in the best interest of the team at that point, and being willing to say, okay, I'm the one that needs to make a change here to make this better.
I also think, we talked a little bit about scaling our culture, and, part of that with the team core value is the importance of winning. But I think we need to be clear on what winning looks like for us.
Yeah.
Defining winning, it may look different to different employees if we're not clear on how we're defining it.
Yeah, it's really important, and this is where our core values would tie into our mission. So if you step back and take a look at our mission, we're very focused on creating value for our employee owners. Well, to create value, you must produce business results. And let's, for this conversation, just keep it very simple around profit.
Right.
You must be profitable. Yes, that's incredibly important, but we have a dual purpose in our mission, which is to be a great place to work.
Right.
And I think it's very well documented that if the only thing that matters, even if that thing is leading to something which is very good, which is the value for our employee owners, and we're all part of this, if that's all that matters, we're probably not going to be a great place to work.
Right.
Because money is not enough.
And we're not going to be a great team.
We are not going to be a great team, and so it's balancing those things. And so, do I feel like we can be too profitable for our own good? The answer is absolutely yes. That may mean, that we sacrifice things that should have been more important to us than that profitability in the short term, or even in the long term, to really accomplish our goals, which our goals are over a very, long term. So it's a balance of these things. And I think that is also a reflection of my natural, personality, is to believe that almost everything is better somewhere in the middle if you put it on a spectrum. It's very infrequent that you're on an end of a spectrum that's the right place to be, because the biggest advantage of that, and I used grit earlier as an example, there are times where that grit hurts you, is if you're so extreme on one side of the spectrum. And so I think recognizing that, that's part of being a good team, is as an individual be willing to sacrifice from times.
Right.
Now, sometimes you should be speaking up.
Right.
It's not a great place. I do not describe a great place to work as being this kumbaya thing either. I mean, like, we've got to do some really crappy things sometimes as a business, because that's what's required of the team. And my best example, we send guys this morning, it was below freezing, it was sleeting, it was raining, and it was windy. And I guarantee you that we have people up on rooftops, fixing a heating system so the business that building is in can continue to operate. And that's not fun.
Right.
And they don't, get real excited about doing that. But that's what our job is to do. That's what we do for society. And so it's important to keep that in mind. And, anything worth striving for is hard.
Yes.
It would not be easy. And so it's balancing all these balls, at the same time. And we will never get it 100% right. But that shouldn't stop us from really working to find, the balance of all those things to make it work.
I also like your point about focusing on the long term. So you can't sprint forever. You need to find that balance, and sometimes working in the middle is a lot more scalable and sustainable for us than overperforming.
And I've talked about it a lot over the years. I really do think your professional career is a marathon, not a sprint. Could we get a rooftop installed in 6 hours? The answer is maybe, once. But can you do that day in and day out over a whole career? And the answer to a lot of those things is no. Is there
and train your people along the way.
Train your people, have high quality work. There's all kinds of consequences.
Right.
Just using speed as one example. And so I think it's really important, that growth core value comes back to getting a little bit better. Well, if you assess you're moving at a speed where you can't make the checks that you have to, that leads to a different thing. If your job for this day is to shovel stone into a ditch, for example, maybe that is mostly about speed. You don't have to worry a lot about quality. You do want to worry about safety,
Yes.
and how you go about it. But that's probably a lot different than the pilot, that has a 25-point checklist that they have to go through before they can even start the engines.
Right.
And I think we want that pilot to do that.
Well,
And so it's figuring out, what's the right circumstance. But our professional career is over, a very long period of time. And that's got to be done, at a pace, that works. And that's different, for all the jobs and all that. But I think it's a very important point that we're in this for the long run. We don't create millionaires by working hard for a day.
excellent point. Is there anything else about team that you wanted to share with the audience today?
I think I would just like to reiterate a few points. And I think the most important is that a team is always evolving. And so we always have to be focused, on making the team strong. I think, secondly, as a teammate, first and foremost, you want to do your job, not to the exclusion of everybody else or not to the exclusion of everything else that's going on in a team. But a very important component of being a great teammate is to do your job. And then I think, lastly, it's seek to understand. You want to understand what's going on with
Right.
the rest of your teams, and recognizing that communication is a two-way street, and we don't always think about the things we should be communicating to others. So if you're on a team and you don't have the information you feel like you need, better to ask than just be, crossing the arms and being mad that you don't have the information you need. And so I think those are all the kind of behaviors that go, we know it when we see it. I think there's really, there's a lot of good behaviors that are a part of a team. There's also some things that are, not great to be on a team. But I think it's putting all that together and realizing, it's just an ever evolving effort.
Great. I think I'd like to end today's discussion just by saying let's challenge our listeners to ask themselves today, are you being the best teammate you can be? And if the answer is no, figure out a way to be better at being a good teammate.
Well, and I think that's one thing, to always recognize, is what's happened in the past is in the past.
Right.
We can always change our behaviors
Going
to be a
forward.
better teammate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. For our audience, be sure to check out Bob's new book, Beyond Your Ownership, being released March 31st, 2026. If you have questions for Bob, we'd love to hear them and answer them in future podcasts. Feel free to submit them to eopodcast@hb-global.com, and we'll see you next time.